In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. O Lord, save thy people, and bless thine inheritance. Grant victories to the Orthodox Christians over their adversaries, and by virtue of thy cross, preserve thy habitation. Christ is among us. He is and ever shall be, always is, and so forth. Welcome. So, today's class, I've decided I will not do everything that I would do normally in lesson one, because I realized over the last couple of years that I tend to fire hose people with information, and I want to take it a little bit slower and give you time to digest things a little more enjoyably. So today we're just going to do kind of introductory to the course and to the general topic of faith and doctrine, and talk about the development of the creed, which is going to be the framework by which we look at the doctrines of the Orthodox Church. So going forward. So first of all, what does this Catechism course, what is it for? What does it entail? This course is meant to be designed to help you be prepared to be received into the Orthodox Church, to give you all the catechetical information that you need. So after completing this course, you will be able to articulate the history, the purpose, the value, and the meaning of the Eastern Orthodox Church's creed, technically speaking, as you will see, the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed, which I can never say, shortly known as the Nicene Creed, even though it's more than that. And part two, the second semester, so to speak, is the class on the sacraments, which takes place in the pre-Paschal period from January through March, and that will be on the Holy Mysteries, or the sacraments of the Church. And we actually talk about more than the traditional 7 sacraments, because I throw in things like funerals and things like that, which are sacrament adjacent, if you will, or sacramental. So we'll talk about other aspects of the Church in that respect. What you have on the registration event, if you're signed up through, and I signed you up, so did you get a link for that and see any of that? Maybe not. So just look in your email. You might see that you were added to this group. I don't know if you have a Realm account yet, but the registration event is accessible inside and outside of Realm. Because it's a registration event, it's public. And the basic structure of this class will go usually about 9 to 10 weeks. Today, like I said, I'm going to not jump right into the True God lecture. I'm going to do some preparatory lessons first, but basically it follows the structure of the Nicene Creed. You'll notice that the big chunk of it has to do with Christology, what's called Christology, the theology of who is Jesus Christ. And to understand that, who he is and what he has done is a large portion of what we'll be talking about. And then we'll come back to the Holy Spirit, the mystery of what does it mean to be part of the church, and who are the saints, foremost among them, the Mother of God. Obviously, our doctrine about the church and the saints is often a stumbling block for people who are coming from Protestant backgrounds, not so much from Catholic backgrounds, but we do have very distinct differences between us and the Roman Catholic Church and how we approach those subjects. The second course, as I said, goes through the Holy Sacraments in this order, and then we also have a whole session on death and funerals, which is one of my favorite topics, as you'll come to learn. I'm always talking about death. I'm a morbid person, for some reason, who loves to talk about death. Makes me joyful, believe it or not. Okay, so again, a lot of this information is available on the registration event through Realm. If you have a Realm account, that's okay. You don't need it for this event. As I said, as long as you have the link, you should be able to access the registration event. But if you haven't joined Realm, please do so, because we also have other materials. There is when you join Realm, you're part of like the whole parish group, but then you're also able to pick what groups you want to be involved with. It's not exactly like a Facebook or social media, but it has some of that functionality. More importantly, there are distinct like classes that you can take that are all online through that. You can watch the videos. what I would recommend if this is like, okay, this is cool, this is catechism, but like basic Orthodox kind of even less technical than the creed stuff, like basic worldview or how you approach worship and how you understand how to have a relationship with God, like kind of stuff that you almost can't articulate because it's so, subtextual, if you will. There's a really good course on that called Journey to Fullness, and that is taught by Father Barnabas Powell. We've taught it before. I'll probably teach it again next year at some time. But it's 16 little videos that are about 20 minutes each, I would say. And the class is like you watch the video and then have a conversation, talk about it, which is great. But you can watch the videos, and I've posted all the questions for discussion that go with that. So if you want to do that in your own time, you can also do that as well. I highly recommend it. Father Barnabas is fantastic at what he does. He's a former Pentecostal pastor, so he's like, you take the boy out of the South, but you can't take the South out of the boy, right? Even though he's still in the South, he's near Atlanta, and so it's a fun guy to listen to. Hey, gang! This is how he seems to start. We had our clergy conference and he spoke, and that's how he started, talking to a bunch of Romanian priests. Hey, gang! I was dying inside. I was laughing. Anyway, plus the Zoom link. If you're on Zoom, you already know how that works. Of course, all of this is probably old hat for all of you after 2 years of Zoom prison. Okay. Course materials. This is where I want to talk a little bit more in depth. Jonathan has just stapled and passed out for those who are here, but also you will find it on the registration event, the one that was semi-up-to-date. It's even more up-to-date as of half an hour ago. So, and all of this has the stuff I just described in terms of what are the lectures. It also describes kind of protocols for what do you do if you miss a class. This is a serious class. Catechism here we take very seriously. You're usually in the catechumenate for at least a year as you go through these courses and you answer these questions. We want to make sure you didn't miss any of these classes. There's also a very extensive reading list. A lot of people read their way into Orthodoxy. That is great that people are reading so much about Orthodoxy, but the real way to enter into the church and live the life of the church is to becoming to church and to going to services and to learning to pray with the church and with the spirit of the church and everything. And so I don't want you to be too wrapped up in reading stuff and thinking that that's sufficient. But this list of reading materials is really there for you to get kind of some basic stuff. And I break it up in terms of like, do we have one nearby? I don't know. Not right now. An Orthodox study Bible is fine if you want it, just so you know. Another really good resource if you are Bible savvy or you want to learn more about the Bible just came out, Father Stephen DeYoung, The Whole Counsel of God. And it's a great kind of layman's introduction to how did the Bible come into being? Why do the Orthodox have a different Old Testament than the Protestant churches? How did the New Testament come into being? What are the best translations into English that we would recommend as an Orthodox church? There is no official one translation of the Orthodox Church because we're still, English is very new to us as a church. Basically, it's only been in the last 100 years or so that Orthodoxy has been in America. And while that doesn't sound like a short period of time, perhaps for those in America, from the perspective of a 2,000-year-old church, it's still very recent. So the one I recommend generally is the Orthodox Study Bible. There's an Ancient Faith Radio Edition or Ancient Faith Edition. That's kind of the main one right now, which is fine. There's some other ones. Father Thomas Hopko, blessed memory, wrote a series of books called The Orthodox Faith, which are all online, available on oca.org. So we have some copies downstairs in one of the classrooms if you'd like a hard copy. Otherwise, you can just kind of scroll through it as a series of things. Most of that we're going to cover, so you don't really have to read it, but if you want to supplement what we do in this class, it's very useful. Secondly, Frederica Matthews Green wrote a wonderful book called Welcome to the Orthodox Church, an Introduction to Eastern Christianity. Again, you may be too far beyond that at this point, but it's a nice little introduction. But most importantly, a prayer book and a liturgy book. You don't need to be following the liturgy book feverishly during the liturgy. In fact, I recommend not doing that too often because it's easy to kind of get lost in the book, especially when the fact is there's stuff in the book that you don't hear out loud. Like there's priest prayers that I might be doing silently in the altar, and it's difficult to know when I'm going to do them and when I'm not going to do them, and I don't always do that consistently for reasons. On most Sundays, I read certain large chunks of it out loud. On weekdays, I may not read those out loud at all. So it can be very confusing to try to follow the book scrupulously. It's there to help, but don't get too locked up into it. A prayer book is valuable. We'll talk about prayer in this class, but and we'll also, by the way, the new plant fellowship that we're doing, which is next week. Is it today? Yeah. Is it today? Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's right, because I said we were going to talk about the cross. There's so much going on right now. New plant fellowship is a little potluck that we have together, and we talk about one of these like orthoprax type of things, like how do you actually do this as an Orthodox Christian? How do you live out your faith in this setting or that setting? Prayer book is one of those topics that we can talk about in there, but we'll talk a little bit about it here as well. Having a prayer book is good. There's lots of different prayer books. Try a couple different ones out. Find one where the language feels good and natural to you. Don't try to pick up one of these like super duper pious hardcore ones that's going to have like more prayers than you'll ever say out loud, but you think it's the best, right? Find one that you'll actually use. The prayer book that is used is the most important thing. So, and we'll talk about that. And also, we'll get you the text for the reception of converts and or the baptism service as it approaches, but it's good to have that as well to kind of ponder the prayers that are in that book as well. Another section is patristic sources. I'd like you to read at least one of the church fathers. It used to be like 2 or 3, but I realize that can be kind of hard. But all of these are just 4 or 5 that I have on this list. There's a bunch more, but these to me are kind of like core ones that really give you some important stuff. If you want to get into some deeper theology, there's plenty available. We have a wonderful library here with lots of patristic resources. Ileana is our librarian, and she'd be wonderfully happy, I'm sure, to direct you towards that as well. Modern histories of the church, you might have heard me mentioning in the liturgy Metropolitan Kallistos Ware, who just passed away. He was a bishop in England. Before he was a bishop, he was Timothy Ware and wrote one of the most kind of foundational books on Orthodox Church history in English called The Orthodox Church. Many, many people came into the Orthodox Church just reading that book, because for a long time that was the only book you could find in a public bookstore before Amazon, before the interwebs. If you wanted to find a book on Orthodoxy, that was about it, unless you went to a seminary and found, seminary press. So that still stands up as a very good book, and he was obviously a scholar, so it's solid. A couple other books are listed on here. Most of them are Orthodox. David Bell's book is actually not Orthodox, but I like his study of the history of the ecumenical councils, and I think it's very accessible to the lay reader. The next section is modern theologians. There's a whole bunch. I've added a whole bunch more into it in the last few years because there's so much good stuff that's coming out. This is a real time of renaissance for Orthodox publishing in this country, so there's lots of really good stuff available, and you can look at any of those, and they're all very good. And then suggested readings are kind of, they're not histories, but they're, or straight theologies. They're more like, what does the faith look like, in the lives of everyday people, like a modern day saint teaching his spiritual flock, or a prisoner of conscience in the gulag somewhere, ways to kind of discover what it's like to be Orthodox. And then lastly, one of the things I want you to read is in this packet, which is the article on page 6 by Father Josiah Trenum. There's a really cool video too, which I'll share. I think it might be on the link there somewhere in the catechumen group. There's a catechumen group on Realm you can join too. But Father Josiah has catechized and baptized about like 3,000 people in Riverside, California. It's like a catechumen factory out there. So much of what we do is based on how he took the approach. And so his article is on what does it mean to be a catechumen, how to become an Orthodox catechumen, and he does a really good job of laying out a little bit of the history, a little bit of the things you need to know about, some of the main traditions about it, and so forth. So please take a look at that. The rest of the packet is forms. I'm not really super formy, but they're there kind of to make sure you've gone through all the steps that you should go through. So I'm not going to be like chasing you down for your form to say you didn't turn in your form, because I'm not that kind of guy. But I want you to have that so you can say, yeah, I've gone through all these things. I've checked off all these boxes, so to speak. I've properly prepared myself and I know what I need to do. There's also a section, if you do miss a class, please go onto our YouTube channel and watch the video from 2021 that I did record, hopefully, on that class, and then answer the questions in this packet about that in a brief couple sentences each, and send me the email to show that you have attended the class. So, because all the classes are required. And we can obviously negotiate whatever needs to be negotiated around any of those requirements. One of the most important things I want to say, because I realized after the pandemic it became a real issue, was a big part of becoming a catechumen is also finding a sponsor. Because in the Orthodox Church we have godparents, even as adults, not just as children. So finding a sponsor is important, because it's important to make those relationships with the faithful. Becoming a catechumen, the next step from catechumen is to be called one of the faithful. And to be one of the faithful means you have to know who are the faithful, what are the faithful like, have some relationships with the faithful. The church is not just me and the Lord and everybody else is optional. You're entering into the family of God. You're becoming one of the faithful, one of the body of Christ. So getting to know the other people in the parish is actually an important part of catechism. Coffee hour, the road to heaven leads through the coffee hour. So don't be shy. If you are shy or you don't like people, that's fine. Join us in some of the other smaller group activities, and you'll be able to meet people in a less maybe intimidating setting or something like that. I'm more of an introvert. I prefer small group dynamics to a big crowded room, so I totally get it. But make sure that you're building those relationships, because you want to find somebody to be your godparent. I can't be your godparent. I'm baptizing you, so I already have a job. And Jonathan, who's my co-catechist, he's been asked many times to be a sponsor, a sponsor for some of the catechumens, but he can't do it for everybody either. So we want you to get connected to other people in the parish who will be able to mentor you, and that's a big part of that. Okay. Now, any questions on procedures, protocols? Don't be overwhelmed by it. The whole point is to take your time with this. There's no, if you're in a rush, I want to be made Orthodox, I want to become Orthodox, and you're pushing and pushing, then it's not healthy. It has to be on God's time. And a big part of becoming Orthodox is being able to be led, not only by the Spirit, but by a spiritual father and by the wisdom of the church. It's like the centurion, becoming a man under authority and being able to go when the boss says go and come when he says come. So take your time with it. There's no rush. We do expedite for some catechumens if there's mitigating circumstances, which is 90% of the time that they are getting married to an Orthodox person. They want to be Orthodox before they get married. In that case, we kind of figure they're locked in through marriage, so we might expedite their catechism. They still have to finish the catechism courses and stuff, but they might be received ahead of time. Other would be maybe for health reasons or something like that, but that's very rare. Okay, any questions? Anybody on Zoom have any questions? I never know how long to wait just because people are shy. Feel free to ask questions. If you're in this room or if you're online, interrupt me, raise your hand, go, oh, whatever you need to do to get my attention. I am very happy when I'm interrupted. I don't want to just blather on. Jonathan, that goes for you. Make sure you interrupt me. Okay, so if you're ready, we'll go into the lesson 0 for today, which is the development of creeds. Just because I think it's important for us to understand that, what is the function of a creed in a church what is the limitations of a creed in a church too. Because of the history of Christianity, obviously creeds are really important. But sometimes people look at doctrinal statements as the sum total of what the faith is, instead of actually the life of the faith, the life of the church. So we want to get you, I'm going to give you lots of head knowledge, but I also want you to root it somewhere more than just in the head, right? I want it to be a part of a bigger story for you. So if we look at the evolution of the creed, we will find, of course, the kind of the earliest doctrinal statement, I guess you could say, is the Shema of the Old Testament. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one, right? But if we were to look in the Christian era, we might say that the earliest example of a creedal statement, whether it was intentional or not, it kind of it becomes such, is the tradition described by St. Paul. Tradition is a very important term within the Orthodox Church. There are some churches that only use the word tradition in a negative sense, which is unfortunate because it's certainly not used that way in the Bible. And St. Paul is actually using the Greek term for tradition here. For what I received, I passed on to you. Tradition means something handed down. That's all that means. Literally, handed to you. So he is saying, this is the tradition I received, and I'm passing it down to you. I'm traditioning it to you. And that is this statement. Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, that he appeared to Cephas and then to the 12, and after that he appeared to more than 500 brothers at once, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all he appeared to me as one of untimely birth. So it kind of begins as a list of key facts about Jesus Christ, and then goes into key proofs for the resurrection, right? He was seen by these people alive after he had been dead. This little core here in 1 Corinthians, if you don't know, is the kind of the first or oldest text that we know of that was written. The Gospels were probably written after, even though the material was there, obviously. They were formulated after these epistles were already in place, and St. Paul had already written a couple of them. But here he's giving you this core tradition about who is Jesus. And you'll see that later creeds obviously incorporate this language as kind of at the center of the creed, and kind of everything else is kind of accumulates around it over time. Another statement, which is often asserted as in terms of a creed, and is kind of presented that way, is in 1 Timothy 3, the great mystery of godliness. Godliness is one way of translating it. Piety or veneration is another way of translating the Greek, maybe a little more directly, because maybe godliness is a little bit difficult for us as Americans. We usually think godlikeness or something like that, but godliness means more piety, or how to be the proper spirit or attitude towards God. So God, or he who, we'll talk about this in a second, was manifest in the flesh, justified in the spirit, seen of angels, preached unto the Gentiles, believed on in the world, received up into glory. Some of this language likewise you'll see in later creeds, not surprisingly. Now, interestingly, the first part where it says God, it's usually translated God was manifest in the flesh. But some people have come and said that's not God in the Greek. It's not theos, it's hos, and it's a scribal error, because the difference between hos and theos is that the theta has a little circle with a little line in it, and hos is just the circle. And therefore, it's like some people go to the point and they'll say it's a fraud and it's not just a scribal error, it's a scribal deception. It doesn't really matter from an Orthodox point of view whether it's he who was manifest in the flesh or God was manifest in the flesh, because it's extremely clear from the rest of the Holy Tradition and from the earliest centuries of the Church that the Church Fathers understood that it was talking about God was manifest in the flesh, not just the man Jesus was manifest in the flesh, but God. And in fact, you see that 3 times in the writings of St. Ignatius of Antioch, that he obliquely quotes this verse by saying God was manifest in the flesh, in some sense. So you can look those up if you don't believe me. His epistle to the Ephesians and the Magnesians, sorry, not the Manesians, the Magnesians, where it's very clear that Ignatius, who is the disciple of St. John the Baptist, essentially, so he's one generation from the apostles, already understood this passage as, yeah, did I say Baptist? My bad. Blah, blah, blah. It goes too fast, see? So in any case, there's very little evidence that fathers read that as not being God at any point. So that's one of the benefits of the Orthodox tradition is you can say, well, it could be this or it could be that, but then you say, okay, well, what are the earliest examples in the church? How did people in the early second century interpret those things? And we do have some fairly good evidence of those kind of things. And Ignatius is one of the best examples. If you can read his writings, that's a great thing to do. Father Andrew Damick wrote a very nice book called Bearing God about St. Ignatius, if you're interested in that figure. He's a very important apostolic father, what we call. But nonetheless, you see all of these kind of phrasing will kind of be in some way incorporated into later creedal statements as well. All right. Not long after all of this, we have an early example of Christian doctrine being described by St. Aristides of Athens. This is dating around 125 AD, so it's wonderfully early. And if you don't mind, I'll just read through it. You can follow me. The Christians then trace the beginning of their religion from Jesus the Messiah, and he is named the Son of God Most High. And it is said that God came down from heaven, and from a Hebrew virgin assumed and clothed himself with flesh, and the Son of God lived in a daughter of man. This is taught in the gospel, as it is called, which a short time was preached among them. And you also, if you will read therein, may perceive the power which belongs to it. This Jesus then was born of the race of the Hebrews, and he had 12 disciples in order that the purpose of his incarnation might in time be accomplished. But he himself was pierced by the Jews, and he died and was buried. And they say that after 3 days he rose and ascended into heaven. Therefore, upon these 12 disciples went therefore throughout the known parts of the world, and kept showing his greatness with all modesty and uprightness. And hence also those of the present day who believe that preaching are called Christians, and they are become famous. So you see he's, again, reiterating key points about who Jesus was in terms of his relationship to God the Father and also what he did for our salvation. These are the key points of a creedal statement that you want to make sure there. We don't really add stuff to that isn't to that point. And we'll talk about that as we go in the development of creeds, why it's a creedal statements should generally be conservative in the sense that they only say what they need to say to get it right about Jesus. Do you have a question?
Well, descended into hell. Doesn't have how do we know?
We're going to look at that. It should show up here in a slide or two. The next part of this from the same Aristides. I say then that God is not born, not made, an ever-abiding nature without beginning, without end, immortal, perfect, and incomprehensible. So now he's getting us into what we will later call apophatic theology, meaning we'll talk about God in terms of what he is not. Because it's easier to say what God is not because he's uncreated, right? He doesn't fall under any of the categories we can see or touch or taste or see or describe or even conceptualize. Everything we have to say about him has to be couched in a kind of negative sense. Like we can't even say that God exists in the way we understand what it means to exist. Because we exist as created beings and our experience of existence is profoundly different than someone who is beyond space or time, right? Now, when I say that he is perfect, this means that there's not in him any defect, and he is not in need of anything, but all things are in need of him. And when I say that he is without beginning, this means that everything which has beginning has also an end, and that which has an end may be brought to an end. So he's outside of even beginnings and endings, right? Outside of time. He has no name, for everything which has a name is kindred to things created. Form he has none, nor yet any union of members. For whatsoever possesses these is kindred to things fashioned, created things. He is neither male nor female. The heavens do not limit him, but the heavens and all things visible and invisible receive their bounds from him. So you'll see this kind of language summarized in the first part of the creed, right? Creator of heaven and earth and of all things visible and invisible. He's above all those things. He's beyond all those things. Adversary he has none, for there exists not any stronger than he. Wrath, indignation he possesses not, for there's nothing which is able to stand against him. So when we talk about the wrath and indignation of God. If you're interested in that, come to my class next Wednesday. We'll be talking about that. For there's nothing which is able to stand against him. Ignorance and forgetfulness are not in his nature, for he's altogether wisdom and understanding. And in him stands fast all that exists. He requires not sacrifice and libation, nor even one of these things visible. He requires not aught from any, but all living creatures stand in need of him. Of course, for us today, we'd be like, yeah, of course, that's how you talk about God. But remember, in AD 125, the majority of human beings in the world were pagans, and they very much believed in gods that functioned and were described and acted like passionate human beings or worse. So, I mean, part of the power of the Christian faith was it was bringing this approach to theology, which, to be fair, could be found in the Greek philosophers, but fused with kind of the Judaic understanding of a personal God in a way that was obviously unique, and of course, most importantly, uniquely revealed in the Son of God. So in any case, this is the kind of language that will later go into how they develop creeds, how they approach the theology of creeds. And almost every kind of mishap or heresy that we see along the way in this class that will come to kind of, they'll require to have a council to condemn that problem. It's almost always because somebody said, yeah, but God has to be this way, or God has to fit this criteria, or the Son of God can't be this way because that doesn't make sense to me, right? So it's always the imposition of created categories and ways of thinking on the Godhead that mess people up. So to approach theology in the Orthodox tradition always is fundamentally cautious, not just conservative and some protective of some tradition, but in the sense of restrained, recognizing the limits of our human abilities to even think about this stuff, and certainly even harder to articulate it. And I always, Father Josiah always starts his talk on the true God like, it is a terrible and fearful thing to stand up here and try to talk to you about the one true God, because to do so is effectively impossible. Everything I say, I'm saying with this gigantic asterisk saying, yes, but, because it's beyond even our ability. So humility has to be an essential part of theology and going forward. All right. Now, creeds don't develop, though, necessarily just because somebody says, I like your church, I want to go to your church. Can you tell me, bullet point, elevator speech, whatever that would be, an aqueduct speech, I don't know, whatever it would be in the ancient Roman world. So you have to realize that creedal statements actually are generated for a certain reason and for a purpose that is not like what we would expect maybe in today's world, where you're like, I go to their website and I see what they believe, right? What are their bullet points? In the ancient church, creedal statements became kind of the statements that you would use when you were baptizing somebody to make sure that they knew what they were getting into and that you knew that they knew what they were getting into. Why? Shouldn't we just be, it's a big church, open love, everybody is welcome? What was going on in the 3rd century for Christians, or in the 2nd century, or even in the 1st century? You could die. You could be killed for being a Christian. And people were being slaughtered often wholesale. There were some cities where there were martyrdoms in the thousands that took place, so genocidal type of situations. Not always. to be fair to the Romans, there were many decades of peace in which Christians were able to make great gains and live side by side with pagans and have valuable interactions with them. But occasionally, an emperor would come along who felt like their refusal to offer sacrifice to him was a threat to his authority. Because in the Roman world, the emperor was an embodiment of a god, and you had to offer sacrifice to the emperor as a god, or you were considered an enemy of the state. And of course, the Romans could be very, very dangerous when they wanted to be, as we well know. So Saint Hippolytus was a bishop in Rome, and these baptismal vows are attributed to them. If you're a nerd about this, we can say, well, the documents of Hippolytus may be later than that, but the material in those documents that are attributed to Hippolytus are going back to that period and quite possibly even earlier. And here's a great example of how a creedal statement is used in conjunction with baptism. If you've read it already, I'm sorry. When the person being baptized goes down into the water, he who baptizes him, putting his hand on him, shall say, "Do you believe in God the Father Almighty?" And the person being baptized shall say, "I believe." Then holding his hand on his head, he shall baptize him once. Then he shall say, "Do you believe in Christ Jesus, the Son of God, who was born of the Virgin Mary, who was crucified under Pontius Pilate, who was dead and buried, and rose again on the third day, alive from the dead, ascended into heaven, sat at the right hand of the Father, come again to judge the living and the dead." And when he says, "I believe," he is baptized again. So by that point, already by 220, they've got a very rich Christology with all that stuff we saw from those early things, making sure that that was included. And he shall say again, "Do you believe in the Holy Spirit, in the Holy Church, and the resurrection of the body?" The person baptized shall say, "I believe," then he's baptized a third time. So this is how it was being done in Rome at a certain time. Of course, that's changed in Rome. It's also changed to a certain extent in the East. We just had a baptism today. We ask people, "Do you believe in him?" And we ask them to recite the full creed as it's developed from the 381 Council. And only after that's done do we even go into the church and bless the waters and start the baptism. So this part that was right in the middle of the baptism itself gets pushed out to before the baptism service even begins now in the Eastern Rite, for various reasons, obviously. The old Roman symbol, this material parallels what you see in Hippolytus. By 340, it's in this formalized form, but most certainly it's older than that. And as you can see, it's almost the exact same thing. It's got all the same elements, the key elements. This was standard in the West for many centuries. It is called by St. Ambrose the Apostles' Creed, but it's not the Apostles' Creed that you'll find today if you go to a Roman or Protestant church. They call it the Apostles' Creed. The thing they call the Apostles' Creed today is actually 8th century, 700s. So we'll look at that as well. So this is called in the East the Creed of Marcellus of Ankara, and in the West it was called the Old Roman symbol. It's still, kind of the core structure of the Nicene Creed as well. But by then, the Nicene Creed is already developing. In 325 and 381, it's supplanted by the Second Council's Creed. Here's that Apostles' Creed. You'll notice that it includes descended into hell. So descended into hell is an important, that's not a problem for us. It's not a dogma. And when it's hell, it's translating Hades. So it's not he suffered Gehenna, which is the judgment, because that doesn't make any sense. He's the judge. He doesn't suffer the judgment. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the wrath of God in our Wednesday class, actually. And we talked about it a little bit on Wednesday as well. But descended into Hades, the harrowing of Hades, is certainly a belief within the Eastern churches. It's not a dogma, because it doesn't need to be, but it's believed. There's a lot of stuff in the church which is not under the level of dogma, meaning this is core stuff that you can't take it out. If you take it out, you're in danger, right? You're fundamentally changing the teaching of salvation. The descent into hell is a great mystery for us. It's a beautiful mystery, and it gives us an understanding of what Christ was doing. But it doesn't, if you know about it or if you don't, it doesn't change. Like, what happens to you immediately after you die, for example? There are lots of people that have lots of opinions about afterlife experiences, such and such. Those are all very interesting, but none of them change anything about what you need to know in this life and how to prepare for that. It's not going to make a difference in the end if you knew some wild thing was happening. Or yeah.
Father, just for those who are curious, I have a comment on the expression communion saints.
Yeah.
During the Reformation, Martin Luther argued communion of saints was redundant, and it's simply not the same thing as the Holy Church. But
he wouldn't be wrong.
But a scholar at University of Virginia, Robert Louis Wilkin, who was a former Lutheran pastor who became Roman Catholic, he did a very careful study of the expression the communion of saints in the early church fathers, including back in the 4th century.
Yeah.
And he said whenever the term was used, it really meant communion with the saints, communion with the departed saints. So he argued in a fascinating article that this really, in the Apostles' Creed, is an affirmation that the church has communion with the departed saints.
Communion with them, and when we take communion, we're having communion with the departed saints, which is true, yeah. But that would still be part. That's actually what it means to be part of one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, right? You're part of the fullness of the body of Christ, which is beyond your present time in history. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely fair enough. So again, all of this is fine from an Orthodox point of view. I would say there's nothing here that I would say is in any way heretical. But you'll notice that we don't use these in our church services. We have stuck with the Creed of Nicaea, Constantinople, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to Christology for what are the reasons. Now, what people call the Nicene Creed, they're usually referring to that second one, Nicaea, Constantinople, which comes from the Second Council. The First Council in 325 actually only said this, and it's a real clunker. Honestly, it's not an easy. It doesn't flow off as beautifully as, say, that Apostles' Creed or even the Old Roman Symbol and that stuff. So we believe in one God, the Father Almighty, Maker of all things seen and unseen. Okay, good. We got that. That's still good. And then it gets into the bushes really fast. And in one Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of God, begotten of the Father, the only begotten, that is of the essence of the Father, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, of the same essence as the Father. Okay, through whom all things came to be, both the things in heaven and on earth, who for us and did all the things. Okay, and in the Holy Spirit. That's all they had to say about the Holy Spirit, which is great. Which is why they had to have a second council, because people started coming up. Oh, okay, fine, but the Holy Spirit is not the same as God. It's a created creature, and they're like, no, not this again. And they had to go through the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life, who proceeds from the Father. So basically saying he's also consubstantial with the Father. But then they include the anathema. The Catholic and Apostolic Church condemns those who say concerning the Son of God that there was a time when he was not. That's the essence of what we call Arianism. There was a time when the Son of God was not. Or he did not exist before he was begotten, that there was a time before he was begotten. Or he came to be from nothing, he's created. Or claim that he is of another subsistence, hypostasis, or essence, which is complicated here because he is a different hypostasis than the Father. But he is the same Usia, right? He's not katistos, he's not created, he's not changeable or alterable. So this is why Nicaea, as much as it's an ecumenical council, ends up being, frankly, insufficient in the history of Christianity. It pounds through one point, but then it kind of leaves a few other areas still up for grabs and makes still some issues. And so, not surprisingly, in this whole 4th century period, 4th century Christianity is like this incredible, I don't know, they call it the golden age of the fathers, but it's I mean, the gold is like after the fact, because in the time it's a scrap, it's a fight, it's a battle for decades. Because at the beginning of the 4th century, what happens? Does anybody know? In about, I think it's 16? The Edict of Milan. The Edict of Milan is a turning point in the history of Christianity because a Roman emperor finally says, you can be Christian. We're not going to persecute you. You're now a legally recognized faith. So Constantine ends centuries of bloodshed, and for the most part, until what Saint Julian not Saint, but Julian the Apostate, one emperor tries to go back to the pagan ways, fails miserably. But for the most part, Christianity from that point on is legal in the empire and so forth, and it changes things. Now, all these churches are free to kind of be traveling, to be open, to discuss, to proselytize, whatever you want to call it, to evangelize. And immediately now, kind of all these potential heresies that were there all along are bursting into the open. There are saints who were died as martyrs, who probably had what we would now consider heretical views. But at the time, it was there was not these councils that had made those decisions to say, okay, no, you got to do it this way. And some of those saints taught things that today we would not say would be orthodox. But they died for the faith. They died within the church. They were received up as saints from that time period. Now it gets difficult. Now you have all these different kind of competing figures coming out of the woodwork. You have Arius, who starts to preach, and he's very clever. If he was alive today, he would be using TikToks and Reels and things like that, because he was really good at getting his message out through popular media, through popular songs and like jargons and stuff like that. Like, there was a time when the sun was not, you could like do all these things. And so the church was like, oh, hold on a second. This guy's teaching all this stuff. There's a popular preacher. He's very charismatic. He's got all these, great quippy things, but he's teaching something wrong. And Athanasius is the one guy to stand up against this super popular guy, to the point where at one point, St. Athanasius the Great is Athanasius contra mundum. It's like Athanasius against the world, because it seems like everybody else is kind of like buckling, and they're like, oh, we don't want to fight about it anymore. Can't we just compromise? Can't we all just get along, right? And so Athanasius pushes this point, this one term, homoousios, one essence. We're going to talk about that when we get into the Son of God class. We'll get into the weeds with that. But these creeds come out of this crucible of conflict going on in the life of the church. And a big part of it is just trying to make sure we're trying to protect that which we received so that we can hand it down to the next generation. That's the point, right? It's just like St. Paul. What I received, I give to you. Athanasius was like, hold on, that's not what we received. We received that Jesus is God. Don't ask me how. That's, we can't explain that God became incarnate, right? That's why his famous work is on the incarnation. But that's what we received, and that's what we have to give. And people like Arius were teaching something else. He's like God. He's close, but he's not God. Not God. Maybe he's a God. Maybe. You come up with these compromise ways, right? Well, not surprisingly, we look back now at history and we say, it was the first ecumenical council, so that must have mean something. Everybody said, yes, sir, we'll toe the line now. We agree to this. This is our creed for the whole church. This is a very romanticized and frankly erroneous view. The first ecumenical council was not necessarily considered ecumenical by anybody at the time. Some people would have. They didn't even have the category at the time, frankly. They just said, well, that was the council. There was a lot of bishops there. It seems pretty important. The bishop called it. It seems pretty legit, but Arius still kept doing what he was doing, and his followers kept doing what they were doing, and people who were kind of on the middle kept doing what they were doing, and it didn't go away for another 55 plus years. So, for example, in 341, there was a synod. Synod is a meeting of bishops in the city of Antioch. If you remember the book of Acts, that Antioch was the first city where the followers of the way were called Christians. So it's one of the oldest, it's kind of like the oldest legacy parishes or diocese in the worldwide church at the time. So it was a big place and a very influential and powerful place. It had its own patriarch, very important. They wanted everyone to get along, so they received Arius into the church and accepted his wishy-washy confession. And they said, see, we're not followers of Arius. Besides, he's just a priest and we're bishops. So this is what they say. We have not been followers of Arius. How could bishops such as we follow a presbyter? He's just a priest. So he follows us. He does what we say. Something's changed, some things don't. And you still see this kind of nonsense today sometimes. Nor do we receive any other faith besides that which has been handed down from the beginning. They make the same appeal to tradition. But after taking on ourselves to examine and to verify his faith, we admitted him rather than followed him. We said, we'll let him back into the church, as you will understand from our present avowals. So they then give a series of creeds. This is the first. There's about 3 or 4 of them in this synod that come to light. All are about the same. So I just give you the first. We have been taught from the first to believe in one God, the God of the universe, the framer and preserver of all things, both intellectual and sensible, invisible and visible. And in one Son of God, only begotten, who existed before all ages, and was with the Father who had begotten him, by whom all things were made, both visible and invisible, who in the last days, according to the good pleasure of the Father, came down, taken flesh, did all the things. Okay? And then they say, and the Holy Ghost and all the other things. So, but notice here, he existed before all ages. He was with the Father who had begotten him. It sounds good, but it kind of leaves it open to say, very much like you might see modern day Jehovah's Witnesses say, well, he wasn't God. He was a God who was with God. He was before the ages because he was before everything else that was created. But it still leaves that, but was he uncreated himself? Was he of one essence with the Father? You have to go to that depth. And this leaves it still open for your own interpretation. You believe it or you don't believe it. He is God, or he's like God. We leave it to you. We don't want to ruffle your feathers. So this, of course, didn't fly, and councils like it at the time didn't fly, and they're not orthodox councils. They're certainly not ecumenical councils. So the drama continues. There's still more arguing and fighting and so forth until eventually you get to the second council called by the emperor in Nicaea, not in Nicaea, but now in Constantinople, which is now, since Constantine moved the center of the empire and built his capital city in the Bosporus there on the old side of Byzantium, becomes known as Constantinople, quickly rises in stature to being the capital of the empire, right? So, of course, now they hold this council here. It's very prestigious. This is where they come up with what we now call the Nicene Creed in most churches. The difference between the Orthodox and Catholic, of course, is, and a big difference, which has caused a lot of theological ink to be spilled and tears to be shed, is one phrase that the West added in at a later date, which we'll talk about. We talk about the Holy Spirit. So it addresses very clearly the post-Arian heresies concerning not just the divinity of Christ, but also the divinity of the Holy Spirit, because there was another group of people, like I said, who said, but the Holy Spirit. It includes all of those elements that we saw of what the old Roman symbol, creation, the Virgin, the church, all those things in the earlier stuff. It becomes the liturgical and doctrinal standard of the Orthodox Church. So this becomes the creed. Creeds become more and more important because now the creed that you said when you were baptized starts to define what church you're actually belonging to. Are you part of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church as understood by the Orthodox party or the Arian party, right? So what creed is being said by you makes a difference. The church has to develop all kinds of canons, which are rules, to say, well, what if somebody was baptized by an Arian, but they said the right creed overall? What do they have to do? Do they have to do do they have to be rebaptized? Do they have to be received a certain way, et cetera, et cetera. So it becomes a very tangled issue. That issue hasn't gone away, of course, because as Orthodox Christians today, we're still in the same boat going, okay, many people want to come to the Orthodox Church and be received into the church. What were they baptized into? Were they baptized into a form that we would recognize? Did they have a creed that we would recognize? What was missing if there was missing something? So it becomes very complicated. And the early canons of the 4th century that deal with this are very much still the canons that we're applying and interpreting today, because we were still dealing with the same kind of issues. We have a multiplicity of Christianities, a multiplicity of creeds and baptisms and so forth. But this becomes the doctrinal standard of the Orthodox Church. Eventually, it even gets added into the Divine Liturgy. You'll hear it at church in the Divine Liturgy, and you're like, oh, okay, that's the creed. But that wasn't normal for the liturgy until even maybe a couple centuries after this. It becomes eventually standardized across the whole church to include the creed into the liturgy. But it's not like at this moment. At this moment, it's just a document that they're sharing around, saying, okay, this is our creed. Make sure you use this or teach people this. And maybe even they weren't using it yet in baptisms the way we use it yet. That probably took a couple centuries to get kind of, okay, now just use that creed. The other way was cool and it was good, but let's just get it right. Make sure they know it, say it, no questions after that. But this kind of stuff takes centuries to kind of work its way through the system, especially in that time. Even today, if you want to make a change in the Orthodox Church liturgically, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a very slow, organic. This group adopts it, this group doesn't. This group hates it, this group loves it, blah blah blah. And eventually maybe it becomes standard across the entire church, or maybe it doesn't. So this is one of the things that eventually became standard over the whole church.
Can I
Yeah.
go back to what you said about communion of saints?
Mhm.
You mentioned a Lutheran pastor who became one Catholic. So you know the prayer on communion in the Anglican Church that says, and that we are very members and corporate in the mystical body of thy Son, which is the blessed company of all faithful people. So I always understood that to mean that the mystical body of the Son is his people. They are the same thing. When you go to the Anglican Ordinariate Catholic Church, they believe that.
Weird.
Because
They
I think the implication to me when I heard it was that no, the institution
oh yeah,
is the
yeah,
Son, is the
yeah, the
mystical body of the
magisterium.
Son, and the people are just the people.
Yeah.
That's what I pick up on. Like, when you do that. I think the Western Rite doesn't use this prayer at all because they adopted
Yeah.
post-communion prayer.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate, but it wouldn't be surprising because of the ecclesiology of the Western Church is very tied up with the magisterium of the papacy and all that. So it's one of those areas where we have difference. We were much more, the communion of the saints. We would not have a problem. We even use, I would say, that kind of language. Our architecture even reflects it. If you listen to Lord of Spirits, which I highly recommend, they had a wonderful caller call in about this, talking about the difference between how architecture reflects theology, and how he had visited the Mormon temple here in DC recently, and how it looked like a hotel to him, which is like, because that's exactly how I felt. You go in this room and they're like, this depicts what our idea of heaven is. I'm like, it looks like a hotel lobby from like a very fancy hotel. I'm like, it's weird. But you walk into an Orthodox church and what you see is an icon of all saints. You see Christ enthroned in the center, flanked by his mother, St. John, the apostles, then all the ranks of the saints. So you're walking into architecturally a representation of the icon of all saints, the communion of the saints. So, yeah, I mean, we would never not think about it in those terms, I guess, if that makes sense, from an Orthodox point of view.
We would say that the mystical body of Christ is his
people. Yeah, the body of Christ is the church, and the church is the faithful. Yeah, I don't see anything wrong with that. So some of the people are bishops, some are priests, and some are lay people.
hold the hand of the Lord in them.
Yeah, we all have different roles and functions.
I think the earliest reference Father actually refers to the Catholic Church to the nations back to the early
Yeah.
second century.
Yeah.
It's where he says wherever the bishop is,
There's the Catholic
there
Church.
let the people be, just as wherever Jesus Christ is, there is the Catholic Church.
Yeah. The bishop without the people doesn't really mean a whole lot. And Jesus is present where the people of God are. I mean, it's, yeah.
They teach that, but then I think that there is an understanding in the Catholic Church that the institution is somehow itself sacred, distinct from the people. Whereas in Anglicanism, it's from this prayer, and I sense also in the Orthodox Church, the sacredness or holiness of the institution itself derives from the fact that this is the people of God.
Well, I know one thing I've read in Catholic Orthodox style that's come up is the difference between a Eucharistic ecclesiology and an ecclesiology that views the Catholic Church as the worldwide institution and under the authority of the world. And it's interesting that the earliest references to the Catholic Church were not necessarily referring to the collection of all the churches around the world. They were referring to, my understanding of the earliest meaning of the word was Catholic, meant according to the whole.
According to the whole or the fullness. Yeah.
And so the letters refer to the Catholic Church that is at Ephesus, or the Catholic Church that is at these other places.
Yes.
And so it wasn't really
Yeah.
connected as like a worldwide institution with a particular government structure. It was.
Well, I mean, we'll talk. There's a whole class on the one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church as an item of the creed. Yeah, but if you're wondering, yeah, you to be part of the fullness of the one Holy Catholic, Apostolic, and Orthodox Church, it's not required to be in reference to any one particular bishop from one particular city in the history of the world. You have to be part of the faith passed down, and there's a living continuity to all of those churches, throughout the world. Yeah, Lacey.
Curiosity, after, like, especially in the early, 300 AD time period, and when these earlier creeds were being drafted, what was the process in which the bishops, the clergy, whoever was making them get to their level of ordination or whatever that they were at the time as they had been transitioning out of the more Pharisaic and that construct of background training? Like, what was the kind of process of looking at that?
The process of holy orders?
Yeah, I suppose.
And the structure of the church?
Yeah, like what was giving them the
Sure.
I mean, aside from like a succession era, but what was giving them the like intellectual and theological training they needed?
Yes. That's a couple questions in there I may or may not be able to answer. So, so how did that's a great question, actually. That makes me want to do a whole doctorate on it now. How did people get essentially seminary training in the ancient world?
Yeah, whatever the equivalent would have been.
That's.
Well, I can answer.
Yeah, you actually kind of wrote a doctorate on it.
Dissertation, seminary, I forget the exact century, but seminary did not exist. That wasn't a thing. I suppose they were different, but what I can't answer is so what did they get? But some things that we do know is that, at that time, sons were often kind of handed out into, you're going to be a soldier, right? And you were exposed to soldiering at a very early age, right? You would carry the sword of the guy, and that's the bird. So if you were one, you'd be priest in the family, right? They'd have handed you off, look at Samuel, right? They'd hand you off and do the exposure thing. You learn on the job, basically.
One couple patristic examples that might kind of give it some life is St. John Chrysostom on the priesthood, because he's describing there in the late 4th century his own process of entering into the priesthood and then later episcopacy, and how they understood it, or at least how he was creating kind of a theology of priesthood at the time. And we all had to read it in seminary, which was fantastic. and how a lot of times, they would run. They would run and hide from ordination because they understood it to be uh, such a supremely holy thing to be called to, that they were felt so unworthy. And I'm sure there was others who ran and hid because they didn't want to be crucified, because there was also that. So that's one thing. Another one is the Life of Macrina by St. Gregory of Nyssa. Who we call the Cappadocian Fathers include a family of saints. St. Basil the Great, his younger brother, St. Gregory of Nyssa, but all of them looked up to their sister Macrina, who was their teacher. And in St. Gregory of Nyssa's Life of Macrina, it's basically his funeral encomium to his sister, talking about how she was this mentoring figure for all of them. And it gives you a little bit of the feel how the faith was being traditioned within those contexts. St. Ignatius, you get a little bit of it because you see a little bit about how he comes into his calling as well, and how he was a follower of the apostles. But yeah, it's a great question, and I would say there's probably not one answer in any particular place. Now there was from the get-go, and you can see it in St. Paul, bishops, presbyters, and deacons. So that threefold structure, and that model has its roots even in the Old Testament, the high priest, the priest, and the Levites. So they were consciously continuing that pattern in the church in the Christian era. The bishops continue to have authority. Now, bishops today are a bit different in terms of their scope. In this country, it's a little bit wonky because we have bishops who their whole diocese is the whole country, but it's not every church in the country. It's just like the Romanians or the Serbians or something like that. Then there are territorial bishops who might have a whole state or two states or half a state or one city. The traditional model was pretty much one city and its surrounding environments. So there might be one bishop for a big city. You might have some bishops in the little smaller towns, but that's how it started, very organically. So by the time of Nicaea, the bishop says, get all your bishops, who are effectively your heads of all these local churches, bring them together. And so Nicaea had 316. It's kind of a significant biblical number too, but in the history there. But get them together, and there were some priests and deacons who obviously came as well. I think Athanasius, was he a priest at the time of the First Ecumenical Council still? He was a deacon at that time?
Yeah, and I was going to tell the story, Father. I think there's this account that's pretty ancient that St. Athanasius, when he was a boy, he and his friends were playing along the seashore and pretending to do liturgy. They were imitating the priests and the bishops, and Athanasius was the one leading them, and they were actually doing baptisms in the sea. And Bishop Alexander of Alexandria saw that, and he sort of took Athanasius under his wing, and he became secretary of the bishop and a deacon. But he was a deacon at Nicaea, and I think he got promoted pretty quickly.
Well, your background's education, right? So, and economics, but you work for the Department of Education. Pedagogy is from paideia, which is like children, right? Instruction of children, right?
Right.
So, yeah. Sure.
But
right.
I think in the case of Athanasius, he just was brought into the life of the church, and it wasn't like there was a separate institution. It was being part of the liturgical life of the church, and he was already well educated.
Yeah.
In the sense that some of these candidates got a great classical education and then were brought into the church.
Yes. Classical education was understood by all of these early church fathers as essential because they were not only steeping themselves in the scriptures, but they also, to have these discussions about theology, they had to understand all these terms like homoousios and hypostasis and all these weird terms that you're going to hear have origins in Plato and so forth and the Greek philosophers. So they inherited these languages that they had to work within. And a big part of the challenge was you got three different ways that you can respond to this. You can just embrace all of it without kind of question, to the point that you syncretize. And basically become Hellenized form of Judaism, which is now not really Judaism. It's not really pagan, but it's like some weird hybrid. And that's the accusation that's made of a lot of early Christianity, actually. But it's not fair. It's fair on some. The Gnostics were a great example of how to do that. Another way is to be separatist and say, we don't want anything to do with it. We totally eschew it. And this is kind of like the route, I would say, even of, and not even entirely, but parts of rabbinical Judaism, which kind of like says, yeah, all that stuff that was a little too cozy with pagan stuff, we're just throwing it out wholesale, and that includes Christianity, right? So that's one way. And there's even movements within Christianity that are separatist still. We see that very easily, right? But the third way is synthesize, right? Is to understand what's happening, use the parts that are good, change the definitions even when you have to, make them your own words, and build your own lexicon from there, and create something that didn't exist before. And I would say that's what the church fathers did. They're not Judaizing Hellenism, and they're not Hellenizing Judaism. They're evangelizing culture.
I would say that's consistent with come from a Mosaic Jewish background at this point, but I would say one of our reasons I'm in the room is exactly to that point where you realize at a certain point that the traditions had to evolve into something else, and about that. But yeah, I think that's absolutely what the progression was on the Jewish side.
Yeah.
And there would have been centers of learning at schools because at the time, like scrolls and later books were very expensive. So these are all
You had to.
places. There's going to be a community of people, talking to these things and also talking to each other and having relationships. And so this case, if you're moving in their circles and you have your son over to those circles, it's somebody who recognizes character in a man and says, that one should be a priest, not just here studying. And there were, later on, religious communities who would do the same, where they would have had access to books.
Yeah.
They would have been making books. So,
yeah,
it's just more relationship-based and informal communities as opposed to, there was an actual program of priesthood.
And it's always important to remember, like, the population numbers in the ancient world were impressive, but they're nowhere near what they are today, right? I mean, it's just, you could have a meeting of 316 bishops in that area, and that was, now you got all the just in the United States it's 50, I think, and if you went to the old world, you'd be in the much higher numbers.
The other example I was going to give, which obviously is typical for how people became bishops, but it shows that the early church, following the canon law and the rules, wasn't always done very strictly. Is Ambrose of Milan was a politician and was a governor in Italy, and when the bishop died, there was a consensus among the people that because he had been a responsible leader, that he would be a great candidate, and he was known to be a Christian when he wasn't even baptized. So they quickly baptized him and ordained him through all
the ranks,
in order for him to become bishop, and then he became a saint, and he was recognized as a saint, great leader of the church, and he really immersed himself in it. But his background at that point had not really prepared him. It was not intentional preparation for life.
Yeah. It doesn't, I mean, it even happens in like the last century. We had a bishop who was a lay theologian who was then elected to become our next bishop. So they had to go through all the ranks and everything. So, yeah. Well, we have a few minutes left today, so I just want to throw out some for review, discussion questions. We had a question in the chat, which was very good. What about the Athanasian Creed? And of course, I look, quote unquote, I looked at it and I was going to include something about it, and I thought, nobody's going to know about that. So of course, Matt asks, what about the orthodoxy of the Athanasian Creed? What do you any insights?
I've seen some Orthodox books that have an adaptation of it. It was translated into Greek, but it has the filioque in it, so it was translated into Greek. They removed that. I think people who have studied it see more influence of Augustine than they do of Athanasius in that Creed. So even though
did you hear that?
It's attributed to Athanasius, it's probably more Augustinian.
More Augustinian, more Western.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But I know that
It's like the Apostles' Creed. It's not really from the apostolic
I've
period.
seen Orthodox books that actually have Greek translations where they do conform with the creed, the Nicene Council.
And Athanasius certainly made doctrinal statements plenty, and we can kind of construct one if we wanted to from his actual works.
I mean, one thing that struck me, because I think anyone who's exploring the Orthodox Church has to resolve, has to address the matter of the schism between Rome and the Orthodox Church, which it wasn't appropriate for Rome to change the creed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the Orthodox position took a really strict view that the Fourth Ecumenical Council said that the Church shouldn't use any other creed, and that anyone who uses another creed, even if they're a bishop, should be deposed. And should be excommunicated. So there was this, and there even were disputes where the early popes affirmed their willingness to want to use the creed. I think it was Pope Leo III who actually put the creed in both Latin and Greek on silver plaques at the Vatican and St. Peter's without the addition, and said, "I've done this for the preservation of the Orthodox faith." But then what happened, I think, in the 11th century is the Franks, who had been lobbying to change the creed.
It's what they had been with for centuries.
Right. They were able to influence the next pope, and they got that pope to agree to use a different creed, even though the predecessors.
Well, they eventually became the popes.
Yeah, right.
So
and they resisted using the different creed and appealed to their own authority to justify changing the creed. I don't know what happened to those silver plaques. My guess is they're still in the basement.
They're hiding in the warehouse with the Ark of the Covenant. Yeah.
I've seen that. There's a meme, St. Athanasius, that says something like dropping truth bombs since 361 or something like that.
Nice. Yep.
Athanasius, by the way, if you didn't know, he was the first church father to list the 27 books of the New Testament that we have. That's the first document to list all 27 books. 367.
Yeah, it takes a long time for all of the possible permutations to be kind of finally hammered out till we get to this one point.
Is he the bishop who punched someone?
No, that's St. Nicholas.
That's Nicholas?
Yeah, St. Nicholas slapped Arius at the council.
Yeah.
Santa Claus. Yeah, came to give presents and punch heretics, and he's all out of presents. That's another meme for you.
There's the one with the little kid asking Santa, sitting on Santa's lap. Kids asking homoousios or what's the other one?
Homoousios, which is like the Father.
And this guy in Santa costume was confused, and the little kid says, "You're not the real Santa Claus."
Yep. Okay, so kind of for a review and discussion, we've already discussed about, just for your kind of wrap up today. Why do you think there is a relationship between baptism and creedal confessions? Anybody have a succinct answer they want to share that they learned today?
Do you mean why do we think they use creedal confessions in baptism?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
This comes to mind in Ephesians 4. St. Paul refers to one Lord, one faith, one baptism. So they're obviously closely related.
Yeah.
And I think also in Acts 8, when the Ethiopian eunuch asked to be baptized, he's asked to make a confession of faith.
Yeah. So. Yeah. It's very ancient. We'll also see when we look at the sacraments in particular, how it gets played out, not only in the baptism service, but in the Eucharist, and how from the very earliest centuries, believing what the church believed was a prerequisite for participating in the life of the church. Why do you think we see a movement toward theological complexity, quote unquote, and precision in the creeds?
Reaction to we're not doing it right. You had to make a decision on what the right way was, and then you codified it.
Yeah, one of the things that's important, you get like into this kind of modern revisionism, like Dan Brown, who wants to say, well, they did that so that they could, make Jesus into God for the first time, or something like that, or that they had some creative agenda that they were trying to bring something new into what was, just some offshoot of Judaism, or whatever conspiracy theory you want to basically throw out there. But the reality is that councils and creedal definitions only emerge as a reaction to a conflict of one person saying, I think it's this, and the other person says, no, it's this. And the church saying, no, it's this, and the other person saying, no, I'm sure it's this. You have to have those like kind of three steps. You have to have a disagreement, which is fine. But then once the church has sat down and kind of weighed it out and said, okay, it's this one, not that one, and then somebody says, oh, but I'm right, you're wrong. That's when heresy begins. Heresy basically means opinion, like putting your opinion over the faith once delivered, right? So the movement towards complexity and precision is exactly because you have these increasing number of, well, how about this? If not that, well, how about this? And when we look in Christology, you're gonna see all the very fine ways in which people kind of try to tweak who Jesus Christ was in relationship to the Father, or in relationship to us, which becomes even more important in a sense, because it has to do with how we are saved now more directly. Yeah.
Father, something that's interested me when I was exploring the early churches is the councils were convened because there was a controversy where they thought the bishops, thought it was actually necessary to get together and talk this through to clarify the faith. But on a host of a lot of other issues, there was really no dispute, no controversy. And what was challenging for me to accept out of my Protestant background is there were all sorts of things that were stumbling blocks for me. But the more I investigated, it just wasn't an issue in the early church because everybody did things like praying for the departed, honoring sacred relics, asking departed saints to pray for you. Those are huge stumbling blocks for people from Protestant background. But when I would read the church fathers, they just referred to it as, of course, these are things that they did, and all the ancient churches, not just the Orthodox, but Oriental Orthodox, Syrian Church, Roman Catholic Church, they all have these
There's common
that are common. And some of them I found even in Judaism, which is remarkable. So I think sometimes we don't appreciate that the councils were held because these were controversial, but there are lots of other things the church believes were necessary to resolve the council.
The councils also, besides having these doctrinal things, always met together to also do housekeeping. So they were also saying, like, okay, what if we have a conflict between two bishops, like a territorial question? Or what if some guy comes into your diocese who doesn't have a blessing? What's the consequence? What's the repercussion? What's the canon? What's the penance for that? So you see all that happening too. What if somebody commits this sin? How long do we put them under a penance? What if they apostatize the faith? Or what if they were baptized this way and not this way? All those things are dealt with in these councils. So they're dealing with the problems that they're actually facing in the life of the church. Okay, why not stick with something simpler and perhaps more elegant like that Apostles' Creed? I like the Apostles' Creed, it's beautiful. Why don't we just use that? Because then we can say we believe the same things as all these other churches.
Wait, are you saying, well, okay, in the Catholic Church we use all three.
Yeah, so why don't the Orthodox use that, like give you an option?
But why, okay, but don't you?
No.
You don't accept all three?
No, we don't use them.
Okay, but it's not just, I want to notice, there's only one.
Yeah.
So it involves different periods of the year. So basically, the period of penance, you say the longer one is penance, right? And in times of rejoicing, right? Like you say the shorter
What does that say, right?
Right, seriously. I mean, Catholics are really,
Say
the long creed.
Catholics are really mad about even an hour. Like you go over 60 minutes, like people are angry. So anyway, so yeah, they use all three because, okay, some have more detail than others, but they all are basically the same. I mean,
So why not?
We
would not use them liturgically.
Okay, but
so why not? That's my question.
Rejecting theologically are different things. You reject that.
We don't reject them, but we won't use them, if that
Okay.
makes a
But
difference.
you wouldn't say they're wrong,
They're not wrong. What are they?
No, I told you there was.
incomplete.
They're incomplete. Because, like that compromise creed of 341 in Antioch, they sound right, and on their face they are right, but they leave the possibility of something very clearly heretical being creeped in. And so the Nicene Creed and the Constantinopolitan Creed that follows it are there to very clearly say it's this and not that. And so that clunky chunk of the Nicene Creed about begotten, not made, a one essence with the Father, true God or true God, all that is like kept to make sure that the point is very clear. This is Yahweh, the Lord of Israel. This is not Yahweh's creation or sub-creation or whatever you want to call it. This is God of God.
So you don't reject the shorter ones, it's just
We
that
just
we
would
don't-
never
we don't
use
wanna
them.
use those to teach,
Yes.
because then someone could like
Yeah.
get ideas. that
Exactly.
we would otherwise.
Exactly. So, and you know, the precision of them is the key, right? It's the precision. You want to make sure. Now, eventually you could say, and we'll look at later councils and the doctrinal definitions that come out of those councils. Those are all binding dogmas, but they're not used in baptismal creeds, ironically, because they're considered to be implicit in the Nicene Creed, just as a further exposition. But you could even, you could argue, well, shouldn't we include those too? But then we'd have like a whole very long list of things to say, ... But that's also why we have this class. So we can go through all those and say, oh yeah, well, I believe the Nicene Nicene Creed. That's why they got rid of that second word. But I don't know about Ephesus or Chalcedon or the later ones. I don't know how I feel about those. So we will go through those and talk about them because they are dogmas of the church. And we'll talk about why dogma is important. Again, because it's protecting the salvation teaching. So if you look at the Nicene Creed, there's basically two axes. There's the horizontal axis of this world, basically what has Christ done in history for us and for our salvation. And then there's the vertical axis of what is the Trinity, and what is the relationship of the persons of the Trinity. What symbol could you use to help remember those two dimensions? Ta-da! The cross, right? It's a nice icon, cross, whatever you want to call it, of the Nicene Creed. So I like to think of the creeds as a love song to God from His church, as a song of praise. And in some churches, you will find that they actually sing the creed as part of the Divine Liturgy. That's a much later development in the Russian style church, but a lot of churches will do that. They sing it in the West too? Maybe that's where the Russians got it from. So, yeah.
Father, can I just mention how Orthodox made the sign of the cross?
We're going to talk about that at New Plant Fellowship, but go ahead and preview it for us.
We don't use usually, Catholic churches sometimes they use the full palm, but in Orthodox church we typically will take our first three, thumb and the first two fingers, next two fingers, and that would represent the three persons of the Trinity, and then the remaining two fingers represent the two natures of Christ.
And you do it right to
And then we push,